Jerry Seinfeld stood on stage in 2024 in front of thousands of people, delivering jokes the way he had done for decades. But something in his life had changed. His own children no longer laughed at his humor the way the world did. When he tried to joke with them, they didn't react with amusement. Instead, they often looked at him and asked, "Is that a bit?" as if they couldn't tell when he was being genuine. Years earlier, in 2014, he had revealed something unexpected in an interview with Brian Williams. He said that he believed he might be on the autism spectrum. His brain, he explained, processed life differently, and as he grew older, this difference became clearer. Now, at 71 years old, his dedication to routine had become more intense, and the emotional distance between him and his family had grown wider. Many people were surprised to see one of the greatest comedy legends struggling with a side of himself that few had ever noticed. He was born on April 29, 1954, in Brooklyn, New York, to parents Cal Mann and Betty Seinfeld. Their lives carried history, culture, and pain that shaped the household Jerry grew up in. His father, Cal Mann, had escaped Hungary after World War II. He worked as a sign painter, running a tiny shop that barely made enough to support the family. But what made him unique was his love for jokes. During his time in the army, he collected jokes from other soldiers the same way some people collect postcards. He stored them in his memory and brought them home, sharing them during family meals. Dinner became less about food and more about laughter. His father would turn the room into a stage, entertaining them with old army humor and sharp observations about everyday life. Jerry's mother came from a Syrian Jewish family. Her parents, Salem and Sulla Osni, had immigrated from Aleppo during a difficult period when many people from Ottoman-controlled Syria were registered as Turkish when entering the United States. Their background carried traditions, storytelling, and strong family values. That cultural blend, Hungarian resilience from his father's side and ancient Middle Eastern storytelling from his mother's side, created a rich environment that shaped Jerry's identity long before he ever stepped on a stage. Jerry grew up in Massapequa, Long Island, with his older sister Carolyn. Their home wasn't fancy, but it was full of personality. Humor wasn't just entertainment, it was a tool the family used to handle stress, challenges, and misunderstandings. Those traditions ran deep. On his mother's side, his great-great-grandmother belonged to a rabbinic family that traced its roots back to King David, adding an almost mythical touch to what was otherwise a typical suburban childhood. His father's small shop, Cal Signs, became one of Jerry's earliest creative playgrounds. The shop smelled like paint, wood, and paper. While his father worked, Jerry often sat nearby drawing, observing people who came in, and joking about whatever he noticed. He once made a handwritten sign that said, "Spring water." Not kidding. Customers loved it so much that some even asked for copies. Moments like that made Jerry realize how powerful it was to make strangers laugh. It wasn't about applause or attention, it was about capturing something small and saying it in the perfect way. His father encouraged him to pay attention to life. Observe details, find what's funny, and maybe turn those moments into something meaningful. Years later, the world would see a piece of his father's life show up as a reference on the famous sitcom Seinfeld, in the Fusilli Jerry episode. To Jerry, it felt like a quiet tribute to where his humor came from. Massapequa was an ordinary town, but for Jerry, it was a treasure chest of humor. The town gave him a dry sense of comedy and constant material. His relationship with his sister Carolyn was typical, sometimes competitive, sometimes supportive, but that tension taught him how to read people's reactions and understand timing. He realized early on that humor could change how people behaved around him. By the age of 8, Jerry became deeply obsessed with comedy. While other kids spent their time with sports or hobbies, he was glued to the TV late at night watching The Tonight Show. He studied the guests, their movements, their pauses, and their timing. One of his biggest inspirations was Buddy Hackett, whose quick delivery and expressive style fascinated him. Jerry practiced imitating him, not to copy his act, but to understand how humor worked. His bedroom slowly transformed into his first comedy studio. He kept a growing file of handwritten jokes, observations, punchlines, and ideas. He practiced his delivery in front of the mirror, adjusting every word, every pause, and every expression. Even at 10 years old, he told people he wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And unlike many childhood dreams, Jerry treated his dream like a serious responsibility. He pursued it with focus, discipline, and a type of routine that would later define much of his adult personality. High school sharpened this passion. At Massapequa High School, he joined the drama club, not because he wanted to act in plays, but because he wanted to be on stage. He didn't like following scripts and often changed his lines, adding unexpected jokes into serious scenes. Teachers found it annoying, but students loved it. In one school play, he added a joke about cafeteria food that wasn't in the script, and the audience broke into laughter. That single moment taught him something important: real laughter comes when people least expect it. Outside of school, he began performing at small events, building a reputation as the person who could always make people laugh. That label became part of his identity. It also became something he felt responsible for, as if making people laugh wasn't just a talent but an obligation. At 16, Jerry spent a summer at Kibbutz Sar in Israel. The experience wasn't glamorous. He worked long days and followed strict routines. But life in the kibbutz exposed him to a diverse mix of cultures and languages. He paid attention to how people communicated, how they argued, how they misunderstood one another. He watched a Russian couple argue passionately about a light bulb and a Greek family debate about washing dishes. The situations themselves weren't unusual, but the way people reacted fascinated him. He saw humor in small tensions and everyday confusion. These observations became early seeds for future jokes about airports, restaurants, or family holidays, places where people from different backgrounds collide in funny ways. His family vacations often focused on visiting Jewish heritage sites. These trips deepened his connection to his roots, but they also created unspoken competition between him and Carolyn, who often received more attention from relatives. Jerry didn't complain, but inside, it shaped his understanding of family dynamics and emotional distance. As he grew older, his interest in observation sharpened. He noticed how people repeated habits without thinking and how small details in everyday routines revealed big truths about someone's personality. His obsession with structure and repetition, traits he later associated with his place on the autism spectrum, allowed him to study life in a way that others couldn't. He didn't just see what people did, he studied why they did it. These patterns became central to his comedy style. Instead of wild stories or exaggerated jokes, Jerry focused on tiny details, like waiting in line, ordering food, losing socks, or understanding household objects. He had a gift for stretching the smallest inconvenience into a full joke. People recognized themselves in his humor, and that connection became part of his success. But the same traits that made him a brilliant comedian complicated his personal life. His routine became strict. He preferred repetition over spontaneity. He needed order, structure, and predictability, even when his family wanted the opposite. Over time, this created emotional distance. His children didn't always understand when he was joking, and sometimes they felt like his comedy shielded him from deeper conversations. They often asked, "Is that a bit?" because they couldn't tell where the performance ended and real emotion began. As he reached his 70s, these differences became harder to hide. The signs he once casually mentioned in the interview with Brian Williams became more visible. He didn't complain about them, but people close to him noticed. His need for routine intensified. His reactions to disruptions grew stronger. His focus on tiny details became almost too sharp. And while the world continued to admire his talent, the distance between him and his family quietly grew. For decades, he had built a life around observing people. Now, the challenge he faced was learning how to let people observe him, understand him, and get closer to him, even as his mind continued to work in a rhythm only he could fully understand. Jerry responded the only way he knew how, with humor. He called himself the invisible son, the ghost of the Seinfeld family. The jokes sounded light, but they weren't really jokes. They were shields. He used comedy to cover the sting of being overlooked, the jealousy he didn't want to admit, and the disappointment he didn't know how to express. That habit of turning uncomfortable emotions into dry observations would later become a defining part of his comedy. He had grown up in a space where he was quiet but always watching, ignored but always analyzing, absorbing everything around him until it became material. In 1972, he enrolled at SUNY Oswego, drawn in by its peaceful lakeside campus. But the isolation bothered him. After 2 years, he transferred to Queens College in 1974. It was closer to the heart of New York's comedy scene, and that made all the difference. Queens offered him classes in theater and communications, but the real lessons began when the sun went down. He started slipping into comedy clubs like Catch a Rising Star during his junior year. He sat in the back, watching experienced comics, scribbling ideas, studying how they delivered every line. In 1975, he finally tried his first set. It went terribly. His jokes about airline food got no laughs at all. But an older comedian, Jay Leno, told him to keep showing up. So he did. Jerry wrote constantly. He filled yellow legal pads with jokes, kept them in thick accordion folders, and tested them on anyone who would listen, classmates, friends, strangers in clubs. His jokes were small observations about everyday life: messy dorm refrigerators where the cleanest shelf always lost the most food, people knocking on doors but never waiting for an answer, the mystery of mismatched socks. His humor wasn't loud or wild. It was simple, but true. As he performed more, his timing sharpened, his delivery became cleaner, and his confidence began to grow. By 1976, he wasn't just another college kid trying stand-up. People had started to notice him. When he graduated, his father encouraged him to find a stable job. Jerry tried. He signed up with a temp agency and lasted 1 week. The office life felt like a cage. He knew immediately it wasn't for him. What he needed was the stage, the microphone, and the uneasy thrill of not knowing whether anyone would laugh. So he quit the temp job, committed himself fully to comedy, and pushed himself harder. He wrote more material, stayed out later, performed even on nights when the crowd was tiny, bombed badly, and came back the next night. He didn't have a backup plan. He didn't want one. The struggle itself became fuel. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing a sense of purpose. In 1976, Jerry stepped into the gritty world of stand-up with only 5 minutes of material and a lot of nerves. He performed in the smoky, noisy corners of Catch a Rising Star, a place known for giving complete unknowns a shot. His first paid gigs earned him barely $50. Some nights he slept on a friend's couch because he couldn't afford anything else. He didn't have a car, didn't have good clothes, and sometimes didn't even have a guaranteed meal. His jokes were about roommates with strange habits and the quiet awkwardness inside elevators, nothing glamorous, nothing exaggerated. But he kept going. He performed twice a night when he could, sometimes for a full room, sometimes for a crowd of 3 people who barely looked up. Every set, good or bad, taught him something. Every silence between jokes pushed him to sharpen the next line. The grind was exhausting, but he loved it. It was the first time in his life he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Every performance helped him sharpen a style that didn't rely on shouting, wild storytelling, or swearing. His strength came from clean, simple observations delivered with perfect timing. By 1977, club owners began to recognize how precise and consistent his act was. He wasn't just another comic begging for 5 minutes anymore. That was the year Rodney Dangerfield invited him to appear in an HBO special. That one night changed everything. For the first time, people outside New York began to know his name. Then in 1980, just when his career seemed to be rising, he auditioned for a sitcom role and was told he looked too ethnic for the part. The rejection hurt deeply. Instead of chasing more acting opportunities, he went back to the one place he felt at home, the stage. He returned to the Improv, the club run by Bud Friedman, and made the microphone his anchor. His material grew sharper and more confident. He cracked jokes about cereal boxes, airplane food, and why people double knot their shoelaces, ordinary things everyone recognized. By refusing to mold himself into Hollywood's expectations, he kept his voice genuine. That freedom allowed him to strengthen the exact style that made him stand out. In January 1981, he performed on an evening at the Improv and delivered a routine about marriage proposals that had the audience roaring. The bit described a man nervously buying a ring, proposing, and having his friend respond, "That's a nice ring, but it's not for me." 10 more television appearances followed. Then in May 1981, he walked onto The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. That night changed his life. Johnny Carson laughed, the audience leaned in, and suddenly America knew who he was. After that, he wasn't just a New York comic. He was a national name. By 1982, he was appearing more and more on Late Night with David Letterman. His routines were tight, polished, and dependable. But even as his TV presence grew, his personal life was still rough. He lived like a struggling comedian. His rent checks bounced. One winter night, when he was close to eviction, he pawned his own watch just to pay the landlord. That moment stayed with him. He later said it nearly broke him, but it also proved he wasn't going to quit after coming so far. Then came 1987. He filmed his stand-up confidential special for HBO, which aired on September 5th. One ad-lib in the show had the audience laughing so hard they could barely breathe. The buzz afterward was real. Producers suddenly saw him as more than just a stand-up comic. The special earned him a syndication deal and opened the door to something bigger. That same year, he met Larry David at a comedy event. Both men shared a deep fascination with the tiny moments people usually ignore. They stood around joking about why shirts have too many buttons and how running into an old date always feels like a courtroom showdown. That conversation eventually turned into an idea, a sitcom without dramatic plots or emotional storylines. Just the everyday, small stuff. When they pitched it, the executives at NBC didn't understand it. One memo claimed the pilot was weak. Audience research said no one would want to watch it. But the two of them believed in it anyway. But one person changed everything, NBC executive Rick Ludwin. He believed in the idea so strongly that he took part of the budget from a Bob Hope special and used that money to give Jerry and Larry enough funding to produce 4 more episodes. On July 5, 1989, The Seinfeld Chronicles finally aired. It didn't do well. The ratings were weak, critics were confused, and most viewers didn't understand what the show was trying to do. But that wasn't the end. In 1990, they renamed the show Seinfeld. Jerry began pulling stories directly from his own daily life. One day he visited a soup shop in New York where the owner kicked people out for not ordering the right way. That intense, demanding man became the inspiration for the soup Nazi, and the episode quickly became legendary. The line "No soup for you" spread everywhere. The real shop owner, Al Yagana, was furious. He even threw Jerry out of his shop once for making fun of him. But the episode worked because it came from something real, just exaggerated enough to make people laugh. By 1991, Jerry wanted more control over the show. He didn't want to only act, he wanted to write and shape the entire series. That wasn't normal for actors at the time, but he fought for it and got his way. Scripts were rewritten at the last minute, jokes were added or changed the day of filming, and the episodes grew stranger and more unpredictable. NBC worried that the show was getting too odd, but audiences loved it. By the 3rd season, the ratings finally shot into the top 10. Jerry's fingerprint was everywhere, and the show no longer felt like normal television, it felt like something new and exciting. Elaine wasn't even part of the original idea. But the show needed balance, so they brought in Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Her audition included a story about awkward airplane bathrooms, something she came up with on the spot. That unscripted moment proved she understood the show's rhythm perfectly. She fit in immediately. In 1992, the famous episode The Contest aired. It was a bet about who could go the longest without touching themselves, but the script never said the actual word. Instead, the characters used clever phrases like "master of my domain." The idea came from a real contest Larry David and his friends once had. The episode drew 18.5 million viewers on its first broadcast. When it aired again, that number jumped to 20.1 million. It won Larry David an Emmy and was later chosen by TV Guide as the greatest TV episode of all time. Despite the risky topic, only 31 viewers complained. Jerry pushed for authenticity wherever he could. The cafe in the show, Monk's, was inspired by Tom's restaurant. They filmed the outside of the real place in New York but rebuilt the inside on a set in Los Angeles. In 1993, a writer's strike nearly shut the whole series down. With no scripts, Jerry leaned on his stand-up instincts. The team improvised more, and the show's style became looser, funnier, and even more natural. Strangely, the strike ended up making the show feel more alive. In February 1994, one of the most iconic moments happened. George Costanza became a fake marine biologist and saved a whale by pulling a golf ball out of its blowhole. That episode came together only hours before filming. Jason Alexander had just 30 minutes to memorize the final monologue. The idea about the golf ball came from Jerry that very morning. The episode later became one of the most rewatched moments in syndication history. By 1998, Jerry negotiated a contract that paid him $1 million per episode, making him the highest-paid actor on television at the time. His journey, from small comedy clubs to rejected pilot episodes to nationwide fame, was something no one could have predicted. But it all happened because he stayed loyal to his own voice, trusted everyday observations, and never stopped believing that ordinary life could be the funniest thing in the world. Rick Ledwin at NBC believed in the idea so strongly that he took money from a Bob Hope special and handed it to Jerry and Larry so they could make 4 more episodes. On July 5, 1989, The Seinfeld Chronicles aired, and it completely bombed. The ratings were low, the reactions were flat, and NBC felt unsure. But that wasn't the end. In 1990, they changed the name to Seinfeld, and slowly things started turning around. Jerry began pulling stories straight from his everyday life. One day he visited a soup shop in New York where the owner yelled at customers for ordering wrong. That man inspired the soup Nazi, and the episode became legendary. The phrase "no soup for you" spread everywhere. The real man, Al Yagana, hated the parody and even kicked Jerry out of his shop once for making fun of him. But the episode worked because it came from something real, just exaggerated enough to be funny. By 1991, Jerry wanted more control. He didn't just want to perform, he wanted to write. That wasn't normal for a TV star. Most actors stayed out of the writing room, but he pushed for it and won. Scripts were often rewritten at the very last minute. Some episodes turned strange and unpredictable. NBC worried, but the audience connected with it. In Season 3, ratings finally jumped into the top 10, and the show felt less like a sitcom and more like a new kind of storytelling. Elaine wasn't even part of the original pitch, but the show needed balance, so Julia Louis-Dreyfus was brought in. During her audition, she joked about awkward airplane bathrooms. It wasn't scripted, but it was so natural that it sealed her role. She had the same rhythm and timing Jerry had. She fit in perfectly. Then came 1992, when the contest aired. It was about who could go the longest without touching themselves, but they never said the word out loud. They danced around it with clever phrases. "Master of my domain" became a famous catchphrase. The whole thing was based on a real bet Larry David had with his friends. The episode drew 18.5 million viewers the first time, and when it aired again, it reached 20.1 million. It won Larry David an Emmy and was later named TV Guide's #1 episode of all time. Even though the topic was taboo, only 31 people complained. Jerry always pushed for authenticity. The cafe in the show, Monk's, was based on Tom's restaurant at 2880 Broadway. They used the real exterior in New York and rebuilt the interior in Los Angeles. In 1993, a writer's strike nearly shut the show down. Without scripts, Jerry leaned on his stand-up instincts. The cast and writers improvised more. The style became loosened, more natural, almost documentary-like. That struggle ended up giving the show even more life. In February 1994, the episode where George pretended to be a marine biologist aired. He saved a whale by pulling a golf ball out of its blowhole. That entire story came together only hours before filming. Jason Alexander had about 30 minutes to memorize the final speech. The golf ball twist came from Jerry that same morning. It became one of the most rewatched episodes in syndication history. By 1998, Jerry negotiated a salary of $1 million per episode, making him the highest-paid actor on television. The show cost up to $3.5 million per episode to produce. His personal earnings hit $267 million, including syndication rights. But even with all that success, he didn't slow down. He mentored writers, shaped every episode, and cared about the smallest details. The final episode aired on May 14, 1998. It drew 76.3 million viewers. The characters ended up in jail for breaking a Good Samaritan law. Critics hated it, and fans were split. Commercials during the finale cost $1 million for 30 seconds. The backlash was loud, but it didn't matter. The show had already changed television forever. After the show ended, syndication brought Jerry another $267 million in the same year. Each rerun earned him around $1 million. Instead of starting a new sitcom, he went back to touring. From 1998 to 2000, his shows made over $100 million in ticket sales. Fans still wanted to hear him talk about cereal boxes, everyday habits, and tiny human quirks. In 1999, a comedian named Bill Kirstenbauer accused Jerry of stealing a joke about airline peanuts. They settled out of court. After that, Jerry organized more than 40,000 jokes and stored them in legal pads so he could protect his material and track what he had written. Then came a 2002 documentary about him rebuilding his entire act from scratch after years of success. It showed a more vulnerable side of him. Even Jerry Seinfeld got nervous. Even he doubted himself on stage. But starting from zero made him sharper again. In 2007, he voiced an animated bee in the film Bee Movie, which made $287 million. The humor was pure Seinfeld, observational and quirky, but the format was fresh and unexpected. The movie's odd, playful style made it a surprising success. Then there was the moment in December 2015 when Jerry arrived at the White House in a baby blue 1963 Corvette Stingray to film an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Watching a sitting U.S. president climb into a vintage Corvette seemed unreal. The plan was never to leave the grounds, since Secret Service wouldn't allow it, but they still drove a slow circle around the White House. It was just Jerry and Barack Obama talking casually, sipping coffee, and joking about everything from kids' opinions of the president to healthcare and football. The whole thing felt relaxed and honest. Viewers didn't get a stiff political interview, they got two people enjoying a conversation. More than 52 million people watched it. For a short time, the White House felt like a comedy club, and both men were in on the fun. 2 years later, something else surprised fans. Jerry Before Seinfeld came out on Netflix in 2017, but it wasn't a typical stand-up special. Instead of performing in a huge theater, Jerry returned to the tiny stage where he first told jokes in 1976, the comic strip in New York. Surrounding him were stacks of yellow legal pads filled with jokes he had written in the mid-70s. They looked like old artifacts that had somehow survived decades of work. He brought old jokes back to life, and they still made people laugh. He joked about left-handed people being treated unfairly, Superman wearing his underwear outside his pants, and other simple ideas that still worked because his delivery was so sharp. The most surprising part wasn't the jokes, it was that Jerry had kept those notebooks for more than 40 years. People weren't just watching a comedy special. They were watching him step back into his past while knowing exactly how far he had risen. This moment reminded everyone that even after fame, money, and cultural impact, Jerry Seinfeld was still the same person who fell in love with small observations and everyday humor. He built a career on the tiny details most people ignore. He kept every joke, every idea, every note. His journey didn't depend on big stories or dramatic events. It came from staying true to the quiet, ordinary moments that most people walk right past. The home videos, childhood photos, and early material Jerry shared didn't need fancy editing. They already carried meaning, and fans felt the honesty in them. After years of being known as a TV icon, Jerry's next move surprised even critics. In 2019, he appeared in The Betrothed on Broadway. The show had already run more than 1,000 performances, but Jerry didn't join as a traditional actor. Instead, he showed up as a surprise guest, grabbed the microphone between scenes, and blended comedy with musical theater in a way that audiences weren't expecting. He asked people about the strangest things that had happened at their weddings and then improvised jokes from their answers. There was no script, no filter, and definitely no safety net. Broadway normally depends on precision and rehearsal, but Jerry brought in the unpredictability of stand-up. People started buying tickets specifically to see him. His improvised moments became so popular that the show extended its run, and after a while the plot didn't matter as much. What mattered was the next unexpected thing Jerry might say. When the pandemic arrived in 2020 and the world seemed to stop, Jerry didn't. Live shows were canceled everywhere, but he adapted. He released a virtual comedy special called 23 Hours to Kill, streamed through Zoom, and it felt like he rebuilt stand-up comedy specifically for living rooms. There was no audience sitting in front of him, just a camera and an empty Beacon Theater in New York. Pre-recorded laughter helped keep the rhythm of jokes alive. Tickets cost $25, which seemed high for an online event, but people still paid for it, and the special earned about $20 million. He joked about dead phone batteries, family members getting on each other's nerves during quarantine, and how everyone seemed stuck in the same repetitive cycle at home. Even without a visible crowd, he made jokes land with perfect timing. Some moments even included fan interactions through their screens, proving that comedy didn't always need a physical stage if the performer's voice and delivery were strong enough. For the entertainment industry, it was a warning that stand-up could still reach massive audiences with no theater, no seats, and no tour buses, just a clear voice and creative timing. Then came the biggest surprise of all, Unfrosted, released on Netflix in 2024. It was based on something as simple as the invention of Pop-Tarts, but Jerry turned it into a fictional corporate crime comedy. In his version, cereal companies were at war. Hostess tried to steal Kellogg's secret plans, scientists went rogue, factories faced sabotage, and even toasters exploded because of steam pressure. None of it was true, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the creativity behind it. In the first week alone, 50 million people watched the movie. Jerry leaned into the ridiculousness, creating fake congressional hearings and turning a kitchen snack into something that seemed like a national crisis. It was an exaggerated mockumentary that twisted history into a wild comedy. But underneath the absurd plot was a deeper skill. Jerry could take an ordinary, overlooked detail from everyday life and turn it into a full story. The real invention of Pop-Tarts was just a starting point. Everything else was his imagination, and audiences loved it. But not everything in Jerry's life was amusing or easy. In 1993, he met a 17-year-old high school student named Shoshana Lonstein in Central Park. At the time, he was 39, and they started dating later that year. By 1994, they were on the cover of People magazine under the headline "Look Who's in Love." The reaction wasn't public outrage, but it stirred a lot of curiosity and quiet discomfort. Jerry later told Howard Stern that he didn't realize how young she was when they met, but he didn't deny that their relationship began before she turned 18. She eventually transferred from George Washington University to UCLA to be closer to him. Their relationship lasted 4 years before ending, but the 22-year age gap followed Jerry for decades. Some fans still question that chapter of his life, and it remains one of the most controversial parts of his personal history. Then came another complicated situation in June 1998. Jerry met Jessica Sklar at a Manhattan gym. She had just returned from her honeymoon after marrying Eric Nederlander only 3 weeks earlier. Within 4 months, Nederlander filed for divorce and claimed Jessica had betrayed him. He said he had been manipulated and blindsided, even after he had given her $25,000 worth of clothes from Italy. None of it changed the outcome. By the end of 1999, Jessica and Jerry were engaged. They married soon after and have now spent more than 25 years together with 3 children. Their marriage has always seemed strong, but the messy beginning continues to stick to their public story. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't quiet, but it was real. In November 2014, Jerry made headlines again when he told Brian Williams that he believed he might be on the autism spectrum, not because he had been diagnosed, but because he felt he shared certain traits. He said he thinks in a literal, extended way, that small talk feels confusing, and that he focuses intensely on details. Some people praised him for being open. Others felt it was irresponsible to make such a claim without a medical diagnosis. Autism advocates debated whether his comments helped or hurt public understanding. For many fans, though, his observation made sense. His routine-based life, his focus on precision, and his unique mental rhythm all seemed to fit. He never declared a label, only said that his brain worked differently. A few years later, in 2017, another moment from Jerry's life went viral when he refused to hug singer Kesha on a red carpet. She walked toward him with her arms open, but he stepped back 3 times and politely declined. Kesha laughed nervously and walked away, embarrassed. Jerry later explained that he simply doesn't like hugging strangers. The clip circulated everywhere. Some people said he was rude, while others said he was simply being honest about a boundary. For fans who followed his career closely, the moment wasn't surprising. Jerry has always liked controlling situations. He often avoids chaos unless he's the one creating it. This was just another example. Since 2001, Jerry Seinfeld Foundation has quietly donated millions of dollars to autism research, child welfare programs, and education. In 2020, he anonymously donated $5 million. Some people thought it was genuine generosity. Others assumed it was a way to soften backlash from his comments about being on the spectrum. Whatever the reason, the money helped real causes, and Jerry never tried to draw attention to his donations. He simply kept giving. Today, in 2025, Jerry's legacy is both complicated and powerful. His net worth is estimated at about $950 million, and some believe he has already crossed the billion-dollar mark. The Seinfeld series ended in 1998, but it never stopped earning money. Reruns still air every day. Syndication deals have made more than $4 billion, and Jerry owns 15% of the profits. In 2019, Netflix paid $500 million for the streaming rights alone. Every time an episode plays on TV or online, Jerry earns money. Comedians in cars getting coffee and his global tour schedules bring in tens of millions more. His fortune is built not on a dozen different businesses but on something simpler, repetition. People watch Seinfeld again and again, and every replay keeps his legacy alive. In 2024, he released a book called Hall of Fame. It was filled with jokes that had never been told on stage. He wrote many of them on yellow legal pads over the years. Some jokes were about getting older, some were about death, and others poked fun at little details like greeting cards that say nothing inside. Fans expected leftovers, but the jokes were surprisingly sharp. These weren't rejected ideas, they were moments that simply never found the right time to shine. For fans, the book felt like opening a hidden drawer of Jerry's brain. Every joke still mattered to him, even if he had written it decades earlier. Since 2022, Jerry has spent more time mentoring young comedians. He teaches them the hard parts of comedy, the discipline, the editing, the endless rewriting. He explains how one of his oldest jokes about Superman took 80 rewrites before it finally worked on stage. He tells them to revise every joke at least 3 times and to write something every day. He even marks a calendar with an X for every day he writes one joke. Most of them never make it to the stage, but the good ones rise. Jerry insists that his success comes from consistency, not magic. Comedy, to him, is a muscle that has to be used daily. In 2023, Jerry shared a humorous parenting confession. His 3 children don't think he's funny. They often interrupt him mid-story to ask, "Is that a bit?" He says his best memories with them aren't from vacations or big events, but from simple late-night cereal moments at home. He believes kids don't need perfect parents. He teaches that praise, pleasure, and problem-solving, the three poison Ps, can ruin a child's growth. He says struggle is necessary, and he avoids trying to be flawless. He just tries to show up every day. Now, in 2025, Jerry is preparing for his 2026 world tour called Laughing Matters. 30 cities have already sold out. He plans to joke about socks, aging, artificial intelligence, and how everyday life never really changes. He says AI will never be able to write a perfect sock joke, and he's probably right. The tour will use new high-tech staging, surprise guests, and a mix of old-school craft and modern style. Even after decades of success, Jerry still wants to see how far timing, simplicity, and observation can go. And as always, millions of people are still willing to listen.